So the term homeostasis, what's it actually? All right, guys, listen, please. Ash, what is it? What is homeostasis? Like, I know you've heard the word before. Like, what is it? What does it mean? Omar?
It's a state where your body is like completely neutral.
Completely what?
Neutral.
Okay. Ash, what were you going to say? What's your definition going to be?
A state of balance.
Balance? Jordan, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say it's kind of the body's way of keeping like a temperature at a certain point.
Okay, yeah, you guys are all right. So homeostasis, I would say balance is a good word. Keeping body temperature at the proper level, that's a good example. Homeostasis is keeping. If we think about humans, for example, we have all sorts of things about our body that need to be kept in check, kept in balance. We need to have the proper amount of glucose in our blood. We need the proper amount of oxygen. We need to have not too much CO2, not too little. We need to have the right blood pH. We have all these different things. And so our body has a whole bunch of different ways of making sure conditions are where they need to be. And that process is homeostasis. If we're going to give it a definition, we could say keeping internal balance. Now, it's not just humans. We're going to kind of use humans a lot as we talk about examples, but all organisms, even a single-celled organism, needs to keep conditions in balance in order to stay alive, in order to live and reproduce in its environment. So you can think of it as sort of a steady state, of a state of balance. Sometimes it's called dynamic equilibrium, because it doesn't just mean like conditions stay the same all the time. If you imagine your blood sugar, your blood glucose, does it stay at the exact same level all day, every day? Or does it change over the course of the day? It changes. But your body has ways of keeping it in the right range. If your blood sugar gets too high, your body has ways of bringing it down. If it drops too low, your body has ways of bringing it up. So your body can maintain your blood sugar in the proper range. That's an example of homeostasis, keeping things in balance. Your body temperature as well. We keep our body temperature in balance through a variety of adaptations. This graph shows sort of what happens to our body temperature through the course of a day. It does go up and down. Your body temperature drops at night when you're sleeping. It goes up during the day. It goes up during times of activity. And it drops during times when you're sedentary. So it goes up and down, but if you're healthy, it stays in the correct range. Sometimes when we define what does it mean to have a disease or to be sick, it means something is disrupting our homeostasis. There's something that's causing a problem, causing us to be unable to maintain healthy, balanced conditions within our body. And so, like I said, it's not just humans. Every organism, a tree, a plant, a bacteria, a protist, a mushroom, a worm, every organism has to maintain homeostasis. And they can do it in different ways. Like a single-celled organism, such as this. This is a paramecium. Okay? It doesn't have a heart and pancreas and all these organs. It's just a single cell. But within it, its organelles do help it to maintain homeostasis. It has a contractile vacuole, which keeps its water balance. We talked about that in your diffusion lab. It has a gullet for taking in food energy. It has an anal pore for getting rid of waste. So it has parts, the organelles, that maintain homeostasis. And they're comparable to human organs. So to take in essential nutrients, we have a digestive system. Right? We eat food, digest it, travels through our body. So we have a digestive system, respiratory system, a circulatory system, but even a single-celled organism has organelles to do those things. It has a lysosome that has digestive enzymes to break down food. It has a cell membrane so oxygen can diffuse in. Things move around in the cytoplasm, the ER, like our circulatory system. So there's these analogies between a single-celled organism and a more complex organism. We get rid of waste with our excretory system, our kidneys and our lungs. Single-celled organisms, materials can just diffuse out of it to get rid of waste. We respond to outside influences with our nervous system, okay, and with our endocrine system. Single-celled organisms, they have a cell membrane that has communication molecules to get information from other organisms to sense their environment. We fight off infection and disease with our immune system. A single-celled organism has a lysosome that can break down foreign pathogens and antigens. So even though the complexity is a lot different, they're very similar in having parts that help to maintain homeostasis. So we're going to go through sort of different functions and talk about how they happen in different organisms. So gas exchange. What gas do we need? We need oxygen, right? We talked about cellular respiration. Without oxygen, our cells can't produce ATP and we die pretty quickly. Right? You can survive without oxygen only for a handful of minutes, maybe. And then because your cells run out of ATP, they start to die. They start to break down. So we do that with our respiratory system. Our respiratory system is our lungs, basically, and the passageways that lead to our lungs. Now, sometimes people get the wrong impression of our lungs. They feel like they're like two balloons. Like as you breathe in, your lungs just like a hollow balloon that inflates and deflates. But that's not really what they look like. This is what they actually look like. This is a real picture of the lungs. They're actually made, I think they look like kind of broccoli or something. Our lungs are actually made of all of these little air sacs that they look kind of like this, like a cluster of grapes or a head of broccoli. And each of those tiny air sacs, those are what fills up with air as we inhale and exhale. And as we do that, as we fill these air sacs that you see up here with air, surrounding them are blood vessels, capillaries. And you can see that here. Each of these little air sacs is surrounded by a capillary. So as we take in air and inflate them, oxygen from the air we're taking in can diffuse into our blood. And also carbon dioxide from our blood can diffuse in the air and we can exhale it. You think about the start of our respiratory system. We can breathe in through our nose, through our mouth. They connect in the back of our throat. So if you're choking on something, like you inhale a Jolly Rancher, it sticks in your trachea. Can't you just breathe through your nose?
No. Want to know why?
Yes, I do.
Oh, because see, like it's all the same tube, right? But it just splits.
Exactly. So our nasal passage goes in the back of our throat. Our pharynx goes to the back of our throat, but then they merge into one tube, which goes down our chest to our lungs. So yeah, if you're choking on something, it blocks your trachea, and it doesn't matter. You can't breathe through your nose or your mouth. But your nasal cavity, your nose and like the spaces, really we have like all these sinus spaces and this passageway in the back of our skull. As we breathe in through our nose, you have nose hairs, you have mucus, and those things have a purpose. The purpose is to filter out the air that we're breathing in. When you breathe through your nose, little bits of dust, pollen, pathogens that are in the air, they get filtered out by your nose hairs, by mucus that's in your nose and in your throat. So they help sort of clean the air before it actually gets into our trachea and gets into our lungs. You also, so if you think the back of your throat is called your pharynx, okay, where the two tubes merge. Okay, you can see here's the passageway for the air from the nose. There's a passageway for air you breathe in through the mouth, and they merge here and lead down into your lungs. That's where our voice box is. And so when we speak, we're moving air through our trachea and we're contracting our vocal cords or relaxing them to make the different sounds. That's also why sometimes people that maybe have had oral surgery, they may have to talk with a little a speaker that takes the vibrations they're making and translates them into sounds. You may have seen that. From there, the air goes down our trachea. That's the tube that goes down our neck into our chest. It's a single tube. Sometimes you might call it your windpipe. And it actually has these rings of cartilage kind of reinforcing it. Because if our trachea were to collapse, then we wouldn't be able to breathe. So it's pretty strong, reinforced with these rings of cartilage to make sure it stays open. It also has mucus. It has hairs in it as well to help continue to filter the air we're breathing in. Well, I wouldn't say stab. So yeah, so a tracheotomy is when they make an incision like here into your trachea. Like if, and you're thinking like an emergency procedure. Yeah, if somebody were choking on something, like up here in their trachea, you could, and they might do this in an emergency situation, make an incision through their neck into their trachea so air can actually get in through that opening and into their lungs. Some people do have surgery and they have a permanent tracheotomy where they have like a little piece of rubber plastic that keeps it open and they have to breathe through that tube. There's also a flap. So when you swallow food, this flap closes and covers your trachea so that you don't get food stuck in it. And when you breathe in, this flap opens up. Now, so it doesn't always work perfectly, right? If you're taking a sip of water and you actually, that little flap is open, you might inhale the water and you start coughing. And that's an adaptation to clearing things out of your trachea, right? Because drowning is getting water into your trachea and your lungs so that they don't take in oxygen anymore. So coughing is a response to that, to expel things. So as your trachea goes down into your chest, it then splits off into two pretty big tubes. Those bigger tubes are called the bronchi. Okay? And those bronchi, they start to split. They're like branches of a tree. They split and get smaller, and then those bronchioles split, and they split until they're very, very small. Why have you probably heard of the bronchi or bronchioles? Bronchitis. What is bronchitis?
Isn't it like a cough? I'm not explaining.
Yeah, it's an infection of these tubes, of the bronchi or the bronchioles. Sometimes a bacterial infection can take hold in your bronchi or bronchioles, and it causes congestion, causes you to cough because they're being, you have this material there, you produce mucus, and that infection is what bronchitis is. And then eventually, those bronchi end in those little clusters of grapes. What do you think? Clusters of grapes or broccoli? What's a better analogy? Yeah, olives? Yeah, but olives don't grow in a cluster, really. I'm going to call them, all right, we'll call them grapes. So this little cluster of grapes are the alveoli. There's hundreds of thousands of them in your lungs. And every time you inhale, these tiny little grape clusters inflate with air. They're really, really thin. They're only a single cell thick. And surrounding each of them are blood vessels, capillaries, which can actually absorb the oxygen and give it to the rest of our body. So to inflate our lungs and inhale and exhale, we have a specialized muscle that does that. It's called your diaphragm. It's kind of like a sheet of muscle that's tucked up under your rib cage. You can see it here or here. Okay? And your diaphragm is what you control to breathe in and out. It contracts and kind of pulls down, and that creates low pressure, forcing air into our lungs. And then when you relax it, creates high pressure, and we exhale. It's under both voluntary control and involuntary control. You know, if you don't think about it, right, your brain just controls your breathing. But right now, you're thinking about it, and so you can tell yourself, breathe in or breathe out. And then when you stop thinking about it, your brain will take over. Sometimes it feels weird when you start to think about your own breathing. But it's controlled by your brain or either voluntarily or involuntarily. So as we inhale and inflate our lungs with air, that's where oxygen diffuses into our blood. Carbon dioxide that our blood's carrying diffuses into that alveoli, and we can then exhale it. There's lots of ways the respiratory system can malfunction. And so a malfunction in the respiratory system is harmful because it means we're not going to be getting enough oxygen to our blood. And as we just talked about, it's crucial that our cells have oxygen. If there's a problem with our respiratory system, if it's impaired, if it's not functioning for some reason, then that's a problem. Bronchitis, we talked about. The tubes, the bronchi, those big branches from our trachea, they become inflamed. Mucus can build up. Bacterial infections can take hold. And that means we're less efficient at getting air into our alveoli. Some people have asthma. Asthma is a disease in which those passageways, those bronchioles, normally under typical conditions, they're wide open and we can get plenty of air into our alveoli. When a person has asthma, there's inflammation of those bronchioles and they're narrower. And if those openings, as we see in this middle diagram, are narrower, it's just harder to get air into your alveoli. It doesn't get in there as efficiently. And a person may struggle to get enough oxygen. But there are also times when stress, exercise, some irritant actually causes what we call an asthma attack. And in an asthma attack, that's when these smooth muscles that are surrounding these bronchioles contract, even further restricting those passageways. As you can see in this, so the further they constrict, the more difficult it is to breathe. And so in an asthma attack, a person may really be struggling to get air into their lungs because of these contractions. We treat asthma with different medicines. So typically if a person has asthma, they may take a daily inhaler. And the name for that medicine, it's called a bronchodilator, which makes sense because it tells you what it does. It dilates or opens up the bronchi because that's the problem when a person has asthma, is they're being constricted. So a bronchodilator every day helps to open up those passageways. There's also an emergency inhaler where sometimes a person would take when they are in this situation, when they're actually having an asthma attack. A rescue inhaler is something almost like a stronger bronchodilator to open up those passageways quickly in an asthma attack situation. But typically a person doesn't take that rescue inhaler every single day. It also has other side effects. It's helpful to in an emergency situation, but it's not something you want to take every day. So there's two different types of it. Sometimes people that are unfamiliar think they're all the same. The inhalers a person with asthma might use, but there are differences. Anyone ever use one of these things? Yeah, it's used to test your lung function. Basically, you take a big deep breath, you inhale, you exhale into this, and you're trying to move this, and it's measuring the force of your breathing, the amount of air you could hold in your lungs. It's used to sort of track progress. My daughter, when she was younger, my oldest daughter, she would go for allergy shots because she had bad allergies. And every time she went, she had to use one of these, and the doctor would see how much she could move the needle on this tool, and that would give them estimate of sort of how her allergies and asthma was doing. Joe? Yeah. Pneumonia is another respiratory disease. Pneumonia is inflammation again of this lung tissue, leading to mucus building up in the alveoli, reducing how much space we have to actually absorb oxygen. And different things can cause pneumonia. Sometimes it's a bacterial infection. It could be a viral infection, could be irritants. And irritants are an important risk factor for lots of respiratory diseases. People that live in conditions in which they're exposed to irritants, air pollution, have a higher likelihood of lots of these respiratory diseases, such as asthma. And so we can actually see when we look at different groups of people based on where they live, we can look at their risk factors and see that there's higher incidence of asthma in people that live, for example, near highways or in homes that have lots of indoor air pollution and VOCs and so forth. A couple more diseases, disorders of the respiratory system. Emphysema. Emphysema is when the alveoli, those grape clusters, sort of lose their elasticity. Typically, they inflate and they're kind of stretchy. They inflate and then they contract when we exhale. Well, if they lose that ability to, that elasticity, it makes breathing difficult. Okay? This is, again, often caused by environmental contaminants. Oftentimes, people that smoke have emphysema as a long-term risk because the smoke interferes and affects those cells in the alveoli over time. And basically, once that happens, it's very difficult for those alveoli to sort of recover. Finally, lung cancer is the most common type of cancer in adults. Any type of cancer we're going to talk about is really a person's own cells, their own body cells dividing uncontrollably, forming tumors. That's what cancer is. It's our own cells that are causing us problems when a person has cancer. And so lung cancer is when in a person's lungs, their cells start to just divide uncontrollably and form tumors. So cancer of the respiratory system can develop in the lungs, obviously. Also can develop in the trachea, in the mouth. And the main risk factors are smoking, chewing tobacco. Those are the chemicals that are part of tobacco and whether it's in oral form, in chewing tobacco, or in smoking, those chemicals increase the risk that those cells are going to start to divide uncontrollably, that they're going to start to become cancerous. There's also other factors. Asbestos is a fiber that used to be used in insulation in houses. Like in my basement, the insulation on our pipes, we live in kind of an older house. The insulation on our pipes is made of asbestos. And so if it were to become airborne and people inhaled it, these fibers are very, very thin. They could get into your lungs, and that can lead to cancer over time. So like you might, if you have it in your house, old houses might have it, you might call in a company to have it removed. Sometimes a company will come in and wrap it up so it doesn't become airborne. Because inhaling those fibers are very harmful. Also, radon is a radioactive gas that can come from the earth. And if you have radon in your house, your exposure can increase your risk of respiratory cancer. When you buy a house, usually before you buy it, you have a radon test. And they'll test the air and see if it's high in radon. If it is, they have different things they can do to bring those radon levels down. But lung cancer is the leading type of fatal cancer. And a large portion of it is preventable because smoking is a huge risk factor for lung cancer. And so the number of people smoking has an impact on rates of lung cancer. And you could see some of that here in this diagram about what lungs look like that are healthy versus lungs that are exposed to long-term tobacco smoke. All right. Any questions about homeostasis or the respiratory system?